Let's talk about Leonard and Lisa Snart in my DC cinematic universe. Leonard and Lisa did not have a lovely childhood. Their father was an alcoholic, horribly abusive man. He was a horrible man who beat Leonard because he wasn't big or strong enough, and he beat Lisa simply because she reminded him of their mom. But then Leonard did get big and strong, and eventually he was bigger and stronger than their dad, and so Leonard started fighting his father back. And Leonard was the one who let his sister take up ice skating. It was something she always wanted to do, but their dad always made the excuse that they couldn't afford it and he couldn't bother to go to the rehearsals. So Leonard started paying for her lessons, and she got really good. Lisa was approaching Olympic-level talent with her figure skating. But everything came crashing down when Leonard was arrested, because it turns out the money he'd been using to pay for her lessons, he was getting by robbing stores. And so while Leonard spent his first stint in prison, Lisa spent that time planning. You see, after this revelation, she wasn't upset with her brother for doing this. She viewed it as heartwarming. Her older brother took up crime to pay for her dream. She thought this dude was the coolest. And so his entire time in prison, she started planning the perfect heist to pay him back for the time he was serving for her. And this is where the rogues would get their start, with the Snart siblings. And when Leonard got out of prison, she presented her plan, and it was perfect. Nothing could go wrong. And nothing did. They successfully robbed a bank. So for a couple of years, he would serve as the muscle and she would serve as the brain of their brother-sister crime duo. And eventually, both of them wanted to get bigger and bigger scores, and that led her to recruit more people. Lisa would go on to recruit her old friend, Mark Martin. Mark's one skill was he was an amazing getaway driver. And Leonard would go on to recruit his best friend, a man he'd met during his first time in prison, Mick Rory. Mick was a pyromaniac, but more importantly, a demolitions expert. And so now with that team of 4 assembled, they started committing even bigger heists, and still, thanks to her planning, never getting caught. And eventually, Lisa would meet a man named Evan McCullough, and the two of them would fall in love. Evan was just as smart as Lisa. The two would spend hours planning heists together. But you see, where Lisa's intellect lied was tactically. She was a tactician master, but Evan was technologically gifted. And with him there, she and him together would go on to develop all of the weaponry that made the rogues the rogues. And then at the end of the first Flash movie, the rogues are all arrested, and the Snart siblings would be recruited by Amanda Waller into her Task Force X, and their first mission together would be the assassination of Count Vertigo. But when they're brought in for their second mission to destroy the rogue android known as Amazo, they would both unfortunately lose their lives against this superior android. And that is the sad tale of the Snart siblings in my DC cinematic universe. Let's talk about Mick Rory and Mark Martin in my DC cinematic universe. Heatwave and Weather Wizard were the 3rd and 4th members of the Rogues, respectively, both of them being recruited by the Snart sibling that they happened to be old friends with. Mark happened to be an incredibly talented getaway driver, and Mick happened to be an incredibly talented demolitions expert and pyromaniac. With them joining the Rogues, the heists only got bigger and bigger. And once Evan McCullough was recruited into the Rogues, they got the opportunities to live their wildest dreams and get technology custom built to the superpowers they've always wanted. Mark's older brother was a barometric scientist who often studied weather patterns. And Mark himself was always fascinated with the raw power of nature. And so Evan designed him a wand that, when used correctly, could influence weather patterns in a local area. This guy would go on to figure out how to summon tornadoes to him specifically to let him fly around. He could harness lightning and shoot it at anything he pointed his wand at, and he could even cloud seed to cause a massive downpour. And meanwhile, Mick has only ever wanted one thing in his life: to be able to burn anything. Based mostly off of the hard light technology that Evan had already been working on up until this point, this is essentially a laser gun with a dial on the side that selects intensity. The lowest level of laser that shoots out of this thing looks like fire, but it is in fact just a hard light hologram projection of fire that does happen to burn at the same temperature as normal fire. And when you dial this thing all the way up, it shoots highly concentrated laser beams, like melt through a foot of steel in a second level laser beams. And so with the power of the sun in the palm of his hand, this dude was gonna start some shit. But at the end of the first Flash movie, both of these guys are also arrested. Later, they're recruited into Amanda Waller's Task Force X, and while out on a mission to assassinate Count Werner Vertigo, they would both sadly lose their lives. And that is the tale of Heatwave and Weather Wizard in my DC Cinematic Universe. Let's talk about Evan McCullough, the Mirror Master, in my DC Cinematic Universe. Evan grew up in the McCullough Orphanage in Scotland, and he was an incredibly gifted child. Despite his orphanage's poor education program, this boy would excel at theoretical physics and hologram applications. But this boy wasn't developing this stuff for good. He was developing this stuff so that he could live the world he always wanted. He could make it real. And he would. He would become a master of holographic technology, being able to summon holograms that looked completely real to the naked eye. Think Mysterio levels in Spider-Man Far From Home. But that's just where he started. He kept tweaking his designs. He kept improving his invention. And after meeting Lisa Snart in Central City and falling in love with her, she would help him crack the final piece he needed to perfect his technology. And now, his holograms are real. Think the holodeck in Star Trek, but when the safety protocols get shut off, his hard light hologram emitters could emit an image that you could touch. It would feel real to the touch, but it would be made completely out of light. And with that level of mastery over imagery, he would use his hologram projectors to hide the heists of the rogues in Central City. And the very first heist that draws the Flash's attention, they fake a fire at the Central City Art Museum. The fire department shows up, the police quarantine the area, and the flames, for whatever reason, won't die down. The building looks like it's on fire. The temperatures read that it's on fire. The fire looks real, but it's not. It's just hard light holograms tricking everyone into thinking it's real. If you touched the hologram, you would get burned, but the inside of the museum was completely untouched, completely safe. And so while everyone outside was freaking out trying to put out this mystery unstoppable fire, inside the rogues were cleaning out the museum. And that's when Barry meets them for the first time, because he shows up on the scene and tries to extinguish the fire, only to find that the fire isn't real and the inside of the museum is totally fine. The rest of the movie is a little bit of a game of cat and mouse between Barry and the rogues, as the rogues constantly outsmart this guy. But eventually Barry catches up to them and traps them in a corner, and they end up taking the Jay Garrick Flash Museum hostage to draw him out for a confrontation that they set up. But we all know how that goes. The rogues lose. The rogues are arrested. But when the cops come to throw cuffs on this guy, he just evaporates. Because Evan McCullough was never there. That's Evan McCullough's secret. Ever since he developed the hard light technology, he left. He's been talking through a hologram this entire time, staying far away, just so if the rogues ever did get caught, he would be at home with an alibi. And exactly what he thought would happen comes to pass, and the rest of the rogues are arrested and thrown in Belrev Penitentiary, where they're later recruited into Task Force X. But this man walked free. Now, his initial plan was to use his technology to break his buddies out of prison, but he was approached before he could do that with a better offer. He was sought out by Vandal Savage, and Vandal invited him to join his Legion of Doom, because utilizing Evan's technology, they could force a confrontation between Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Superman, and the Flash, where all four heroes would destroy each other. And on top of that, Vandal would pay him $25 billion. That's billion with a B. Evan could not turn that down, because just imagine, he breaks his buddies out of jail. He breaks the love of his life out of jail, and he's there waiting for them with their greatest enemy, the one that put them in jail, dead. And he has $25 billion that the gang can now use for anything they wanted. My Mirror Master is not a selfish man. He does genuinely love Lisa Snart, and he genuinely became friends with the rest of the rogues. And yeah, it might seem like a bit of a dick move that he was the one hiding behind a hologram the entire time and his buddies got thrown in jail while he didn't. But that was for plausible deniability. Because if he'd swapped out all of his buddies for holograms, that would get caught immediately. And if all 5 of them were out on the loose, the police would never stop looking for them. The Flash would never stop looking for them. But if he, an unknown who just evaporated into fucking mist before everyone's eyes, just disappeared, and then months later, the rest of the rogues vanished from prison, perfect. But after the Justice League beats the Legion of Doom, this dude is thrown in a deep, dark prison. He becomes an accessory to all of the crimes and all of the murders committed by Vandal Savage's orders during his entire plan. This dude never sees the light of day again. But we do get one last cameo of him in my Justice League Crisis movie, sadly mourning the death of all of his friends and the love of his life. And that is the tragic tale of Evan McCullough in my DC Cinematic Universe.